Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're going to do now the Maamar of Vayishma Yisro, Tavshim Hey. That's the third Maamar in the series of the Yud Shvat Maamorim, in continuation of the Basi Legani Maamar. We already recorded and learned Basi Legani in two sections, and Arbo Rosh Hashonim Hein. This further explains this idea that we've discussed already about the tzimtzum, the constriction within God Himself, that even before the great famous one, there are, and there has to be, by definition and understanding how God is, as best we could, there are tzimtzumim before that. The mere fact that God goes from His pristine state to relating to anything else, meaning creation, is already a tzimtzum within Himself, etc. And then there's the process. So let's do this inside. Vayishma Yisro midyon chesen meishes kol asher osa elikim lemeishel Yisrael ami ki heitzi havayis Yisrael mimitzrayim. And Yisro, who was the priest of Midian, the father-in-law of Moses, heard everything that God did to Moses and Israel, his people, that God took out Israel from Egypt. Upirish Rashi asks, of course that's the first verse in this week's parsha. Rashi asks, Mashmu Shama, what did he hear? Ubo, and then suddenly he decided to come and join. Kriyas Yamsuf Hulu, he heard about the splitting of the sea. What does the splitting of the sea have to do? Why is that pertinent? We also have to understand a little bit more about this, because this parsha talks about the praise of Yisro. Number one, he left his birthplace, the land where he grew up, to the desert, to hear words of Torah. So now if we're praising the person, you have to say that he's the priest of Midian, with all its connotations of idol worship, etc. More than that. That which it says subsequently. The father-in-law of Moses, it seems that he was even more on a higher level and more advantageous than our teacher and our Rabbi Moses. A person is obligated to honor their father-in-law, meaning that means that the father-in-law is of greater stature. Especially according to how Rashi describes, based on the Medrash, their reunion, the great glory and honor that Yisro was honored with at that moment when he came. When Moses went out to greet his father-in-law, so Aaron also went, and his sons, Nadav and Avihu. And who would see that these great people going out, they also didn't go, so it became a whole parade to honor Yisro. You have the new word, the Madura Chadash, yeah? Thank you. So from all of this we understand how great Yisro must have been, for the whole Klal Yisrael is coming out to greet him. I was once reading a story, this is just very parenthetical, about there was a person called Rabbi Gusman, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in 770 in the Lubavitcher Yeshiva, and he was a very young man, but he was very learned, and he came late to some great thing, but the Chafetz Chaim was there, and he rose for him, and then Chaim Moshe Grzinski was there, he rose for him, and therefore when they got up, everyone got up, so it was a whole thing. They were talking about this later. He was the Rosh Yeshiva in 770 for a period. He was a great scholar in himself, but anyway, it's just a parable of what we're talking about. If somebody honors and everyone else goes honor, it means a great honor that they got. So, Shemikoz Muven as well as the Yisro came, the Rebbe, so if Yisro was so great, we have to understand B'yeser, exceedingly so. Lama nitzka kan shuhu kein Midian. Why does it mention here that he was the priest of Midian? We want to say the nice stuff. What are you talking about that? Shoya came with this other that he was a priest for idol worship. Gam yidu adik was avadir masal zelachak mur misham shusayim behem shatav hashem beis. We also know what the Rebbe Rashab taught in his Maamar that begins with these words in his continuum of Amorim that began in 1912. Mahu shekesev eskola sharosa lekim lemeshel Yisrael. Mahu shekosev eskola sharosa lekim lemeshel Yisrael. What is it that is written that everything that God did to Moses and Israel, Amoy, ki hoitzi Hashem Yisrael mitzrayim, because God took out Israel and the Israelites from Egypt. Why is this divided into two categories, into two things? Number one, he did to Moses and Israel that he took them out of Egypt. That's what he did. And it seems that there's two things here. Rashi explains that he heard about the splitting of the sea. So there is the idea that number one, that Yisro even heard about it. And that's one thing. That everything that God did for the Jewish people is another thing. And then it says in particular, and he took them out of Egypt, which is really, we would think one thing, but it's written as two. Vayishma Yisro v'skol asher asa chulu v'chi heitzi Hashem chulu v'tzorich lov v'mao techen gimel yonam elu. So we have to understand what are these three things. Gam meivashom mashkasa b'zeh b'fashasenu. He also brings that which the Zohar writes in our parsha of Yisro. The Matan Torah hoya ayidei hidos Yisro davka. The giving of the Torah happened specifically after this admission and submission of Yisro. Specifically, the Kasher Omar Yisro when Yisro said, "Now I know that God is greater than all gods," lowercase g, and the Zohar says it like this: "Kedain istalik v'isyaker kuchabrichu v'yikre ilo v'tato." That when God was moved, so to speak, and cherished, the Holy One, blessed be He, with in the supernal realms and the lower realms, with proper recognition. Basar, after that, He gave the Torah. Midaik was there's a tumua. So the Rebbe Rashab says this is something that we have to understand. Like, Loma b'hidos Yisrei davke hoyatolini matan Torah. Why should the giving of the Torah be dependent on the submission and the recognition of Yisrei, even according to the Zohar, etc. To understand this, we have to, by way of introduction, learn Bir Achidush of Matan Torah. We have to go over what happened at the giving of the Torah. That for that we have to have first the submission of Yisro and his recognition. The Torah was already around before the Torah was given. It was only given to the Jewish people at that time, in the year 2448. But the Torah was there at the original, as part of creation of the world. And the Rebbe says here, essentially, in essence, the Torah is connected and has a bond with the world. Like everyone says from this Medrash, it's quoted already, the Bar Mitzvah Maamar, that the Torah preceded the world by 2,000 years. There explains it's in stature, because time wasn't created yet, but the Torah was involved also in the creation of the world. From the mere fact that we say that the Torah came before the world, that proves that it has a connection and in a relationship with the world. Especially since our sages call it, give an amount, 2,000 years. And there's a certain amount, whatever it means, a specific amount. This shows us even more so that it has a relationship and a connection to the world. In addition to the fact that before the world was created, the Torah was connected to the world. More than that, there was Torah study also actually before the Torah was given. Like we learned in the Medrash, Torah study was already something that Adam already did, because it says that Adam already figured out, and he transmitted to his descendants the idea of the leap years, the Soida Ibur, and when and how the years, the lunar year, gets reconciled with the solar years, etc. And that's something in Torah. It's actually part of the first mitzvah. He gave it over to the subsequent generations. And then the more so, even more detail, the nation of Israel already studied Torah. Like the Gemara says explicitly in Yoma. In addition to this Medrash that we just quoted, Avraham, as he was older and elderly, he was sitting in yeshiva, and Yitzchak was elderly, he was studying and sitting in yeshiva. Yaakov zaken yeshiva. Jacob was he was as he aged, and the whole time he was sitting and learning the yeshiva. Someplace I think it says Posca. The yeshiva, the Torah study never separated from our forefathers, even in Egypt. The Rebbe doesn't bring it here, but of course Jacob famously sent Judah to set up a yeshiva in Egypt, etc. And then there was also Torah study by Amram, the father of Moses. You say this, the Rambam says that Amram was commanded certain mitzvahs in Egypt, and then he also gave it over. And then there was Torah study by Moshe, not just because he was Amram's son. He was the leader of Israel. To the extent that his Torah study before the Torah was given, he wasn't just 70 years, but 70 years is a significant amount, and it has its significance, like King David speaks about in the Yemeshon Senibam Shivim Shana. It's already a complete amount, that the days of somebody being on earth. But more than that, because there King David continues, in a strong way, it'll be 80 years, and Moshe was already 80 years old. That Moses attained and achieved that level of strength, and that was with his Torah study of 80 years. Moshe was 80 years old when he gave the Torah, when the Torah was given. So therefore, begs explanation. So then, what was the whole big deal about Torah? The Jews were already learning Torah anyway. So why did they have to have the big revelation, the whole thing? They already had Torah. And to the extent that we said, in order for the Jews to get the Torah at Sinai, we needed Yisro to come along and submit and to acknowledge and recognize the greatness of the Torah. As is known, before the Torah was given, there was a decree that the supernal realms, in other words, of holiness and spirituality, they could not go and descend to the lower realms, to the physical earth. The physical could not be elevated and be turned into spiritual. And when the Torah was given, this decree was abolished. The reason for this is, and we learned this in other Maamorim already, especially in the season of Shavuos, the giving of the Torah, Before the Torah was given, they only had what's called the revelations of the Torah. It was in a different in a different framework, in a different sense, and it wasn't with the whole commandment, and it wasn't able to permeate the world with the holiness that is now permeated when our mitzvah is performed. The Torah was like light, it was illuminating. But when the Torah was given, the essence of God is able to come forth and permeate. This is something which is higher than just the revelation, the flowery part and the nice part and even the luminous part, but it's actually able to turn something which is with which a mitzvah is performed gains various levels of holiness. This idea of the darkness becomes the shield, in other words, and we'll talk about this concept a little bit further, but it's saying that he turned his darkness, that which was not so, and it changed, and it was also the secret part of him was also then brought in and affecting the world. Even to his essence. He brought his essence in through all of the chain of the worlds, and this is his method of permeating the world by the performance of mitzvahs, with Torah study, etc. This all happened at the giving of the Torah. Now that Rebbe gets into the nitty-gritty. To understand this whole idea, this is where we continue that which we explained in the previous discourses of Yitzrat, Basi, Legani, and our Bor Rosh Hashanah Heim. The Tchilas Kol Seder Hashtalshlos Chayisai Yidei HaTzimtzum. So the beginning of the chain of creation started with the great Tzimtzum, the great contraction, where God had to make room, so to speak, for existence of something which should feel and appear to be something of its own substance, even though its substance is really made up of God, but not the way God is in his pristine state. It's in a way that God creates. And then, for the method of the creation with which God used his infinite light to even bring about that light to be a light that is a tool for creation, there also had to be a tzimtzum. Because in God's pristine state, that's all there is just whatever God is. It's not yet light that can relate to creation, that there's no ideas, there's nothing else. So for there to even become that stage that has to get then concentrated, that also took a tzimtzum. And then the Rebbe says, to the extent that whatever it is on the highest level, the first thing that follows essence of God, whatever that may be, if you could even talk that way, the Rebbe says, as much as it's possible to even say such a thing in relation to the pristine state of God, the essence of God. Whatever it may be, that's already tzimtzum. So even if it's the highest level and it's totally godly, and it's the mere fact that God is now going to relate, or God is thinking, or God is deciding, and it's within himself, this is already a tzimtzum. It's a contraction within himself. Till worlds are created in relation to just the essence of God, it's just God and his name. But if there's already a name is something that a person uses and is used to relate to something else. You only need a name for someone to refer to you. In other words, a person himself, when they're thinking that, let's say, I'm hungry, I want to go to the store, I have to do something, you don't think your name, because it's your essence that is all that. But your name is in relation to something else, to relating to the rest of the world, someone else to call you, to refer to yourself, etc. In other words, for the read to name, now the name of God is a very lofty thing. He creates with the letters of his name, etc. But that's all already after a tzimtzum, because it's not God's essence. ובמתן Torah נמשך למטה העניין שלפני הצמצום. And when the Torah was given, the whole tzimtzum is used and comes down here. עד לבחינת יושש חושך סיסרי. To the extent that the mystery, the secret of his darkness is what now also is imbued in the world. And he uses that to create the world. And now here the Rebbe says something. This is a bit of a tough concept. This we say every day in the evening prayer. He rolls away light for darkness and darkness for light. Now, it's the simplest way of understanding it is we praise God. The sun sets and it becomes dark, and then the sun rises and becomes light. So you have night and day, and this is the praise of God that we say every night in the evening prayer. Now, the deeper meaning is not just like we explained, like as is explained elsewhere, about what this means according to Chassidic. That he has to move away the infinite light that's prior to the first contraction to make room for the world's creation, because of the darkness. Tzimtzum is lack, it's constriction. Here there was first God filling this space. Now he has to move himself aside, so to speak, to fill it with whatever he's going to do for creation. And the v'choshen chaz tzimtzum pnei erakav, and then whatever then he does because of this constriction, but it's still godliness. And now he substitutes that with the kav, which is drawing down a certain segment of that light to make the creation. But the Rebbe says Eliezer Elkan. It's more than just this goyel, or that. It's more than that process of moving darkness for light. The goylul oim bnei choshech hainu shamshochas ha'orim b'chines ha'choshech shelamayla mi'or. When you're rolling away this light that was there, because of the darkness, you can cause it not to be there anymore. That would make darkness. But the light that you're going to bring down is from the darkness that's higher than that light. In other words, that light is already after the first symptom that it even exists there. He says the source of it is now in relation to everything else that's darkness. And that becomes light. That gets drawn down. So that he moves down this darkness, and that's his screen. He brings that down into the world through creation, with creation, for creation. That's the whole idea of Matan Torah, that he was able to bring the darkest, in other words, the most that we can, that we couldn't relate to, that's highest level within godliness. And that comes down to us. Now we know why before the Torah was given, you needed Yisro to come along and him to acknowledge this. The Hinik we know this is also a famous concept. It says in Ecclesiastes, I see that there is something better, an advantage for wisdom from folly, from foolishness. And that is like there is an advantage of light over darkness, from the darkness. We have to understand what does this mean. What's advantageous about light is that it comes out of the darkness. Specifically, through refining the darkness, we get light. Now, this is not a concept that's easy to understand, because we know darkness as absence of light. But darkness is something which was created in and of itself, and from there you could draw forth that that could become light. Now, that's the idea that's being conveyed here. This is also the advantage of wisdom over foolishness. Because in relation specifically with the foolishness, that's where there's the great advantage of the wisdom. But the Rebbe is going to explain this even more. Pirush, sichlus kan. You can't just say plain foolishness, because that's no big deal. You don't need the wisest of all men to tell us how much greater wisdom is than foolishness. That any fool may tell you, right? Or any wise man will tell you. Anyone can say that. It doesn't mean the simplest way. What's the big deal? that wisdom is better than foolishness. The intent here is foolishness, which means in relation to the wisdom of holiness, the holy things, and that. And like it's explained subsequently in the Maamar by the Rebbe Rashab, by the fifth Rebbe, sometimes it's all kinds of knowledge and wisdom, but that's not Torah. Outside things. The Nikra Sichlis, why is it called foolishness? Because we know the difference between wisdom and of holiness and wisdom of the shell, of the outside, of the other side. The Chachma de Kedusha Bittul. Wisdom of holiness is submission. It's subservience. Now, the Chachma de Klippa, he tachas hayeshes. And Chachma of Klippa, of the other side, of the shell, that's the ultimate of what we call yeshes, which is translated as something which is of substance, substantive. In other words, it's not subservient, but it's proud. It's its own thing. So, since the wisdom of Klippa brings to haughtiness and pride, etc., therefore it's called foolishness. It's not with humility, and it's not recognizing that there's other things. It has its own thing. But through refining that, and that could be used in Torah. In other words, to show that it's part of a greater process and a greater picture. That's when that could already have something, but you have to get to the advantage which is Torah out of that. And then that also shows the advantage, and it becomes the advantage within the wisdom of holiness. In other words, when that's used in Torah, and Torah in itself, even without that particular wisdom, whatever it may be. In other words, it's all subservient and submitted within the wisdom of Torah and holiness and godliness. That's what happened when Yisro gave his statement that now I know, this is his submission, that now I know that God is greater, right? Ki Yisro over the school of it is a Shabbalam. It says, Rashi already says that Yisro was in the position to say, now I know that God is greater, because he tried them all out. He test drove every idol. So he says, okay, this is nothing, this is the God, right? So he served every idol worship. And by the way, that's already Chachma, there's wisdom there, but it's of Klippa, of the shell of the other side. Through his submission, then we had this advantage of the wisdom of the holiness and the light of holiness. So this is how we explain that through his submission, specifically, Torah came about, the revelation of the giving of the Torah, because the revelation of Matan Torah came from this level of God, moving aside in the darkness and drawing it down and turning that and bringing that into the world. The part that was even deeper than what we could see. This is the advantage of the light. This revelation comes specifically through refining the darkness. This is the idea of the advantage of light from the darkness, not just over darkness, but from the darkness itself. The light and its advantage comes from darkness, which is higher than light. In the picture of things, this is this idea that the darkness now turns into the flow of the energy and becomes the light, etc. The Rebbe explains that this means when the light comes out of the darkness, actually The darkness changes over and transforms to light, like days in Asis and Be'er. That light is even greater light. That it's drawn forth from the darkness in this level, that the darkness itself becomes this method that God uses and transforms to light and turns into the Torah and everything else. So now we know it says the priest of Midian, the father-in-law of Moses. The Rebbe says that these two things are also illustrative of the same concept. This idea of the advantage of light that comes out of the darkness and wisdom that comes out of the foolishness. The priest of Midian, father-in-law of Moses, means specifically this idea, this aspect of him, that the priest of Midian specifically, and that he had the wisdom of the klippa of the other side, and the hardiness, the substance of not holiness. The idea of Midian is also has the connotation of something like a fight or a disagreement and a skirmish, etc. Tachlis hayeshes, and that's the ultimate of haughtiness, because there's no one allowing each side doesn't allow the other one to be. And from this, that gets transformed to the ultimate of elevation, becoming peace, so to speak. He becomes the father-in-law of Moses. The chosin v'lashon chois darga. Father-in-law in the Hebrew term is chosin, but it also comes from the word chois darga, which means going down a level. Father-in-law Moses means this word chosin, that Yisro brought about, he affected the idea of descension. Within Moses. Then, through this, there was the ability for there to be the giving of the Torah. This idea of bringing down the supernal realms to the lower realms. And that's what it took. Moses was the intermediary. Between Israel and the Holy One, blessed be He, or between Israel and the Torah. But Moses himself was on such a lofty, high level. The Rebbe doesn't say it here, but the Rebbe says here, his name was Moses because he was drawn from the water. It means the loftiest level of the water. Water is like Torah. In order for Moshe to come down, this happened through Yisro. The Rebbe doesn't say it here. This is what I was telling you. Moses didn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights. He was able to subside, and we learned this in other Maamorim, on the Word of God that is the program of how sustenance even works. In other words, he was so in tune with spirituality. So he was very spiritual. Here we needed that the Torah should come down into this physical nitty-gritty world. That took the idea of Yisro coming in to drive that point home. All puns intended. So, the Medrash tells us that when Yisro was still in Midian, he already nullified and he got rid of his idol worship. This was Moses. What happened was, can you imagine what happened? Moses became his son-in-law. It doesn't say the exact details, but you imagine what was going on there. If he still had some idols going on, Moses was pretty much negating that, but Moses convinced him. For Moses to be able to convince him, he also had to come down and get into the idea where Yisro was. He had to come down to that level and talk to him. That this affected Moshe. It brought him into this being able to relate. So that he was able to be the intermediary at the Torah giving. So then we say, So again, we have here transformations from dark to light, transformations from too holy to be brought into the world. This whole idea of tzimtzum, the idea of Moshe from his holiness to the world, and the idea of foolishness coming into the wisdom. All these transformations, that Rebbe is all lining them up together, and in one big juxtaposition, and showing us that this is all the same concept. And then the Rebbe says here, that's what you see here, that the priest of Midian becomes what? That's not what he's known by anymore. Now he's father-in-law of Moses, that brings Moses down. Like the advantage of light from darkness, and like the advantage of wisdom from foolishness. Now that it goes back, circles back to what Rashi says. What did he hear about? It says he heard and he came. He heard about the splitting of the sea. This submission of Yisro, that he came to join the Jewish people, etc., etc. He says that now I know that God is the greatest, came from the splitting of the sea. What is, again, the splitting of the sea? Again, the same idea. It's splitting and breaking through all of the tzimtzumim. It's a change of the way things were, the change of how the tzimtzum means that now there's a status quo that has to be changed for something else to happen. Here there was water. Water, the rule is that it has to flow. Now it has to change to be able to stand upright. I'm sorry. And even though the Red Sea is a reference to the Sfira of Malchus, which is the lowest Sfira, the lowest attribute, the attribute that's all inclusive. Soifa the Choldargin, it's the end of all the levels, but it's also, of course, the beginning of the next level, but it's the bottom. The Zeu Gam Yam Suf Loshen Kates Vesuf. Then also it really means also the reeds. It also means the edge. The word in Hebrew Suf means the edge, the water's edge. And this is also, by the way, the Red Sea is really the Reed Sea. That's another discussion. So, but it's called Yam Suf, like it says in the Zohar, Loshen Kates V'Soif. It's like the end and the final part of something. It's the same letters, and that's also really etymologically why it's the water's edge. It's called the water's edge, the edge of the land, etc. I believe you could say that in modern Hebrew too. When you're talking about an edge, you say besuf, if I'm not mistaken. Nevertheless, it's known what the sages teach us, and it's brought in several places, that when God split the sea, all water in the whole world everywhere split. So that's how everyone knew about it. Why did all water split? Because God changed the program. The program was that water should flow. Now, through all the tzimtzum, He made that the program about water is that it split. So it didn't only split in that spot, it split everywhere. Because He changed the whole way He created it. And then He changed it back. So that's according to this dictum of the sages. So we understand that in the whole chain of creation, so at that time, all of the interactions and the concealments and the curtain, so to speak, that cover up, everything got split, everything burst through at that time. Everything changed, so that there was able to be more godliness permeating this earth. Gam elu shelamayla min hatzimtzum, including these original tzimtzumim, which are higher than the main tzimtzum of creation. V'gam lamayla, that ever comes here really northbound. V'gam lamayla m'chinas or insof lamayla mayla and ketz, and even higher than the infinite light. That was the first relation of light for the aspect of creation within God Himself. But since God is infinite, going up and up and up, those tzimtzum, the split happened everywhere into the highest level. This is an extremely hard concept for us to wrap our head around. But as much as we can even at least know about, there exists such an idea that this was in everywhere, even in the essence of God, so to speak. Lamaila, the Rebbe says, Lamaila Mechinas Ein Sof, Lamaila Maila Adin Ketz. Now we spoke in the other Maamar that this is concealment after concealment because it's less and less than what we can relate to. But nevertheless, all that is also burst through. This affected that also Yisro, who is the wisdom of Klippa, that's the ultimate of substance, which is haughtiness, which covers over humility, submission, godliness, spirituality. He also changes over to light. And now the Rebbe continues, these details that the Torah enumerates with what Yisro heard, Vayishma Yisro, Yisro heard everything that God did, that he took out the Jewish people from Egypt, from Maamar explains the Maamar, we could say that this is the 4 levels of what is referred to in Chassidic, and we're not going to go into this at length now, we've discussed it other times, but the oiris, which is the light, we consider that like the energy, and then the kelim is the vessels, that which is containing the energy, the substance, so to speak, and we also call it levushim, then the garments, the way this is expressed, clothing encompasses, but it's how we relate. So you wear a suit to an event, and you wear casual when you're going shopping, and something else for something else, etc. Vehicholas, and then the chambers, so to speak, which is where all of these are placed and what they do, etc., etc. So it's these divisions that the Rebbe Rashav compares this to. The kriyas yamsuf zeu v'chinas ha'er be'etzem sh'lamayla v'chinas ha'kelim. So the splitting of the sea means the instruction. So this is the light, the energy. This is the level of the essential, the light in its essence, which is higher than vessels, higher than being contained, higher than something that creates, higher than something that has to be animated. That God did to Moses and Israel with that God did to Moses and Israel, his nation. That's the idea of getting this energy into the contained vessels and making the idea of creation. And that which it says that God took out Israel from Egypt, that's the idea of the placement and the tasks and what it has to be, what's the significance and what its goal is and what its job is, etc., etc. That's the idea of the garments and the chambers, as the Rebbe Rashab expounds upon that Maamar. The Rebbe just mentions it here briefly. This is the meaning of the true meaning of the verse that the Maamar starts with. That Yisro, the priest of Midian, father-in-law of Moses, heard all that God did to Moses and Israel, his people, that God took out Israel from Egypt. Through the revelation of the splitting of the sea, then when all the contractions were also burst through, to the extent that then it went through the whole process in the vessels of containment of this energy, and the garments and the chambers. Through this, that's the transformation of Yisro, who was the priest of Midian, becomes the father-in-law of Moses. Here that I'm saying a clear message to all of us. We all have our little Kohen Midian, and we could all be transformed from priest of Midian to father-in-law of Moses to this level, and that's the lesson here. So here we don't have the yellow markers to explicitly highlight where it says Kol Echad V'Achas, but here's the message that I was saying: Ki Yisun Ha'or Min HaChoshech, like the advantage of light that comes from darkness. V'zeh Po'ol Achkach Zagili Matan Torah. This affects the revelation of Matan Torah, the revelation of Torah in our lives. Sheyihi Yagilu B'Chines Yoshes Choshech Sisrei. So we have this revelation of the darkness coming forth and then becoming the the great light that it can be. Lamata mata ve'lam hazatachn, lower in this nitty-gritty lower world, which is the lowest. V'hine HaTorah nitzchis, the Torah is eternal. Now the Rebbe does say that. There is the giving of the Torah every single day. We have this opportunity. Here the Rebbe gives us the inspiration, the teaching, and the energy, and the power, and the blessing. And like it explains, the Alter Rebbe explains Likutei Torah, the dictum of the sages, we have to every day relate to the Torah in great passion, cherish it. And like it says, just like over there at the giving of the Torah was with fear and trepidation and fright and sweat, also here, in other words, every day we're in awe of the Torah. Because right now we also have the idea of giving it the Torah. But right now we don't see it. We have to feel it. We have to work on ourselves to get to that level. Well, when Mashiach comes in the future to come, Yisgal, it's going to be revealed. Till being revealed in a way that we can understand it and grasp it. It does indeed say that Matan Torah won't happen a second time, but we'll be able to see that revelation that came then. Like the Rebbe said also in the last Maamar, the fulfillment of the prophecy in Isaiah 40, that the glory of God will be revealed and all flesh will see together, that it's the mouth of God speaking. There, the Maamar that Rebbe said in other Maamarim, that you won't even need eyes, because it says the flesh itself will perceive and see that it's God and see godliness. The true ultimate redemption, the full redemption of the Mashiach Tzidkeinu through our righteous Mashiach, with happiness and gladness and cheer and goodness of heart. Everyone should have a very good week, materially as well as spiritually, and a good Shabbos.